Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Harlan and the special commission meeting. The time is now 5:34 p.m. We'll call this meeting to order. It has been duly posted as required by state law. And we have a quorum of the city commission if everyone is here. At this time, I'll ask for you to please rise. As Commissioner Lopez, please.
Heavenly Father, I come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we make this affect the community of Harlan, and continue to remind us that all that we do here today, all that we accomplish is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you, and for the service of humanity. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. State law conflict of interest exists if a commission member or certain members have personal standing as a qualifying financial interest in an agenda item. Members with a conflict of interest cannot participate in the discussion or vote on the agenda. Are there any known conflicts of interest disclosed in this time?
None.
None.
Item 3, citizen communication. At this time, the public is invited to address the city commission and speak on any matter not specifically listed for public hearing elsewhere on this agenda. Please note that the city commission members may not respond to comments or deliberate on topics addressed. Mayor, we have one citizen communication and then Mr. Ron Lozano.
Good afternoon. We hope to learn in the new year. Come Saturday night, truth might shine on the tax levy, the bill. The rest of you already are cognizant, but maybe one of you. Mesmar tells the mayor to throttle a concerned parent about schools. In the same breath, he tells or touts his role in the early college twice. Sandwiched in between them is mention of a new American Airlines. They had no history. Fact is, this is American's second go around here. And Frontier is no longer here and may go belly up everywhere soon. The hypocrisy in shutting concerned parents down while he goes up to the same well twice is utter hypocrisy. Ponders overnight achievements. Well, one airline chose Harlingen as its first expansion location. Who was there at the initial overtures to lure a future #1 airline? A Lozano. Southwest has served Harlingen well, and we in turn have supported that innovative airline. He notes crime from 4 years ago. What a gem. An empty white elephant building. He contends the city only lost $250,000. By his criteria, we all know about fiduciary duty that he doesn't adhere to. Citizens have listened very recently that he intends to spend upwards of $500 million if, as he tells us every cycle, that this is going to be his last attempt at office on non-productive ventures. They tell us, the citizens tell us, door to door, we can't afford that one. Mesmar must go, lest we go to the poorhouse. I do like golf. I do like Jeff, but Jeff well knows of the 9-10 regulated golf courses in the valley. Because I am so biased to the individual of Tony Butler, I will say that we are the 7th. Even Gabe, as a good golfer that he's become, recognizes we haven't moved from the 7th spot. So hopefully we can retain that or get another golf course on our edge. Will come back and put us down to 8th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. That concludes our citizen communications, Mayor.
Okay,
So we'll move on to item 4, presentation by Kelly Little, Certified Local Government Coordination with the Texas Historical Commission on the City of Harlingen becoming a certified local government and various incentives associated with the program. Lady Director.
Thanks. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Alexis Rojas for the record, Downtown Director. I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Kelly Little from the Texas Historical Commission, who serves as the Certified Local Government Coordinator. Kelly will be presenting on the benefits and incentives of becoming a certified local government and how this designation could greatly benefit the city of Harlingen. Her insights and expertise will provide valuable information on how the city of Harlingen and the CLG program can enhance historic preservation efforts and support the city's development goals. So without further ado, Ms. Kelly Little.
Thank you. I should ask, I had sent a PowerPoint. Is that going to be shown or should I share my screen to show that?
I believe you probably use.
Yes, please share your screen, please.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Give me just a second. I'm not as great at at Zoom as I am at Teams. Let's see. All right, sorry about that. Thank you. As she said, my name is Kelly Little, and I am with the Certified Local Government Program at the Texas Historical Commission. So I'm here today to talk about the requirements to participate in the CLG program, the benefits, how we could work with Harlingen to move forward on that. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today. December is a busy time of the year with our closeouts of several programs, so I would prefer to be there in person, but thank you for having me virtually on this Zoom meeting. So in case you're not familiar with the Texas Historical Commission, I'll just briefly touch on what we do. So our mission is to protect and preserve the state's historic and prehistoric resources for the use, education, enjoyment, and economic benefit of present and future generations. We have a number of programs around the state that you might be familiar with, including the Texas Main Street program. We have state historical markers. We have a cemetery preservation program, a very active archaeological program. And federal and state rehabilitation tax credits go through our office. And we have 40 historic sites around the state, and we administer the National Register program in Texas, just to name a few of the things that we do. But my program is the Certified Local Government Program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, what that is. Certified Local Governments, or CLGs, are municipalities that have demonstrated through a certification process a commitment to local preservation and saving the past for future generations. And this commitment is key to preserving our built environment and our unique cultural heritage around the state. The CLG program was federally mandated as part of an amendment to the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 and is administered at the federal level by the National Park Service and at the state level by the Texas Historical Commission. So it's really a partnership between the local, the state, and the federal government entities to promote preservation activity at the local level relative to state and national preservation efforts. And we work to empower local communities to better protect their historic resources. And I just want to mention while I'm on the slide that a city can have a local historic preservation program without being a CLG. You don't have to be a CLG to create a local preservation program. In fact, you have to have one in place to apply to become a CLG. So there are some communities that think they have to be a CLG to have a local preservation ordinance and have a local preservation program. And it's kind of the icing on the cake if you have that in place. But you can still do preservation at the local level without being a CLG. So how do we do what we do? So the CLG program works with local communities that participate in the program to help them identify their local preservation priorities, ensure that they're meeting recognized historic preservation standards and best practices, and providing access to financial and technical services with the goal of furthering the identification, evaluation, designation, and protection of buildings, sites, districts, structures, and objects. We currently have 80 CLG communities in the state of Texas. So we have 19 counties and 61 cities. You can see that we have a few CLGs in South Texas and the Valley, not a ton. We're definitely looking to help support preservation efforts in parts of the state that aren't participating in our program as much. So who can participate in the CLG program? City or county governments can participate in the CLG program. With county governments, the CLG program primarily helps the participating county CLGs to establish and maintain a system to promote preservation throughout the county and help them identify and document historic properties within their jurisdiction through state enabling legislation. So for counties to be certified, they need to establish and maintain a CLG committee within their county historical commission, and they need to appoint a historic preservation officer who oversees the county CLG committee. But for cities such as Harlingen, it looks a little bit different. Participating cities develop and sustain a strong preservation ethic that uses local zoning and permitting to preserve historic landmarks and districts. So they have to develop that program before they can apply to become a CLG. But the basic requirements for a city to become a CLG are that they need to adopt a historic preservation ordinance that meets our program requirements. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those requirements are for an ordinance. They need to establish a local preservation board or commission that would be able to take action to designate local landmarks and districts as our local buildings and districts as local landmarks, and they would need to be able to review any proposed alterations to those landmarks, such as demolition or rehabilitation or relocation. Cities also need to appoint a historic preservation officer to administer the preservation ordinance and oversee the city's historic preservation program. So those are the basic requirements that need to be in place for a city to request certification. And then the ongoing requirements of the CLG program is that CLGs have to adopt the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And this is just a basic approach that was established by the National Park Service for reviewing work to historic buildings. So if you have a commission that's reviewing a certificate of appropriateness, they need to use these standards that are consistent with state and federal guidance to make sure that that you're meeting best practices in the preservation movement when reviewing changes to buildings. Cities need to ensure public participation in the local preservation program. That's typically done through having city boards and commissions have to comply with the Texas Open Meetings Act and allow for public input at the meetings. So it's not really going above and beyond what is required by that. Cities have to maintain a system for the inventory and survey of local historic resources. So a local historic resources survey is, it's a planning tool, really. It's going out into your community and identifying the historic properties, and an inventory is basically keeping a list of those. So we require that CLGs have a system for identifying the historic properties that they have and the potential historic districts, and keep a listing of what that is. We also require that CLGs review and comment on the National Register nominations that are within their jurisdiction. As I mentioned, this is a federal and state partnership that's administered by the National Park Service, and the Park Service is the one who maintains the National Register of Historic Places. So if there's a property or district that's getting listed to the National Register in your community, our staff would send a copy of that nomination to your local commission and request the CLG's comments on whether or not the property meets the criteria to be listed in the National Register. CLGs are also expected to monitor and report on state and federally designated properties. What this looks like varies a lot from community to community. You know, we have recorded Texas Historic Landmarks, or RTHLs, as it's listed here. Our state designated properties as our state antiquities landmarks. And we really rely on CLG communities as our partners in the field. You know, it's a big state and property owners don't always, know that they need to notify us about changes that are going on. So it's kind of just an informal, if you know about something that's happening to a state or federally designated property, we appreciate getting a call from our CLG community so we can coordinate with the property owner if there's a review that's required. So it's really part of that local and state partnership for communication. We also require that each CLG provide training for their historic preservation officer and for the commission. At least one training related to preservation needs to be attended by the historic preservation officer each year, and at least one member of the commission. Our staff at the Texas Historical Commission and the CLG program, we try to organize regional trainings, and we can come and do training specific to one commission. We also send out links to other webinars, and we have at the Texas Historical Commission, we have an annual conference every year. So anything like that would meet that requirement for training, but it's just to make sure that the people who are administering your local preservation program are staying on top of the trends and understand the changing approach to preserving historic buildings and know about best practices. We also require that CLGs submit an annual report to the CLG program, which is something we send out every year. And all of these requirements are laid out in the Certified Local Government Handbook, which is available on our website at the link at the bottom of this page. And I'd be happy to send a link that could be distributed if anyone would like to take a look at that. So the benefits of the Certified Local Government Program, I think the main one, and it's kind of an intangible benefit, but it's a demonstration that your community has a strong local preservation program. So we're really rooted in preservation best practices, and participating in the program gives credibility to local preservation activities and their relationship to broader planning processes. So we promote activities that are consistent with national and state legislation and standards, and that encourages responsible decision-making for the treatment of your community's historic resources. The CLG program, we can also provide technical assistance. If you are a CLG community and your historic preservation officer is considering adopting design guidelines or drafting changes to the preservation ordinance or needs help with survey, we're always available. They can call us, and if we can't answer their question, we can put them in touch with someone else at the Texas Historical Commission who can. And that's really, I think, a benefit for especially communities that are a little bit more isolated from other cities that have active preservation programs, because the people administering them are sometimes operating in a vacuum without anybody else in the city who's doing preservation work. So everybody at our office is trained in historic preservation, and we can really help be a resource to the communities that we work with. And similar to that, being a part of the CLG means that you're a part of the CLG network. We have an active listserv that historic preservation officers can participate in. So if they have questions or want to find out about what other communities are doing, they can reach out over that and talk to other historic preservation officers and other people who are doing preservation work to find out about design guidelines or ordinances or what other communities are doing to further preservation. We also offer training opportunities. As I mentioned, we can come and do regional trainings. We offer travel stipends to attend the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions biannual conference. And we bring in the National Alliance of Preservation Commission do periodic trainings for preservation commissions around the state. And I think that really goes to make sure that all the preservation decisions that are happening within a community at the commission level are consistent, and helping convey the expectations to the public of how preservation works. One of the most popular benefits of the CLG program is that it does qualify the local government to apply for matching grants for preservation projects. So at the Texas Historical Commission, we have the CLG grant program, and through that, 10% of the Texas Historical Commission's annual apportionment from the National Park Service has to be distributed to CLGs. So every year, this is an annual grant cycle, and every year we make grants available to participating communities. Last year, we had about $180,000 to distribute to our CLG communities. And that usually funds between 7 to 10 projects each year. And our grant awards range from $5,000 to $50,000 per project. And in addition to the CLG itself, the city government, CLG grants can also be applied for by third parties within the CLG. So that could be if a county is a CLG, a city within that county that's not a CLG could apply for a grant. A nonprofit organization within the city that's a CLG could apply for a CLG grant. And so could educational institutes that are delegated to administer a grant. And the types of projects that we typically fund, our agency also has the Texas Preservation Trust Fund grant program that focuses more on construction work to building and brick and mortar work. The CLG grant program, we really emphasize the types of projects that help a local preservation program with its operation and doing the things that it needs to be doing. So we offer a lot of grants for historic resources surveys to identify new landmarks and new historic districts in the community or to update older surveys that were done. We fund a lot of National Register nominations to help create National Register individual properties and districts within a community. We also will fund a local preservation plan pretty frequently, and that's basically a document that lays out the goals for your local preservation program and helps plan for the next 5 or 10 years. We can also fund things like design guidelines, tourism and education materials and activities, preservation related training and travel expenses. We can fund rehabilitation of historic properties. It's not something we do very often, but that is something we can fund. Being a CLG also opens a community up to applying for grants from the National Park Service. They have a number of grant programs that are funded through the Historic Preservation Fund. And typically those programs are only open to state governments, nonprofit organizations, but they're also eligible, CLG communities are also eligible to apply for those grants. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the requirements to become certified, especially with a community that hasn't been that involved in these requirements in the past. So one of the first requirements that I mentioned for a city to become a certified local government is that they need to appoint a historic preservation officer. And so that is in a city, it's a staff person who's dedicated to administering the local preservation ordinance and the city's preservation program. That's often in a lot of communities, we see that the planning director is appointed as the historic preservation officer, and they've got a staff under them who's working to do preservation as well. But it can be, some cities hire a person exclusively to operate as the historic preservation officer. And the typical activities of the preservation officers center around administering the preservation ordinance. So they're meeting with applicants who are interested in having their properties designated, who are interested in doing work to historic properties. They're preparing notices. They're reviewing certificates of appropriateness applications for work to historic properties and preparing staff reports about those, leading commission meetings and sometimes enforcing certificates of appropriateness. And we do require that cities make every effort to appoint a historic preservation officer who has a background in historic preservation. What we say is that they need to meet the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards. And those are standards that are established by the National Park Service to qualify people to work on historic buildings or work in historic preservation. We realize that there are not always people with that background available in the community. So if a CLG cannot find someone who meets those standards, then we request that a letter be submitted explaining how the historic preservation officer will be able to fill the duties of the job and how, like any ongoing training, they're going to have to be able to fulfill the duties of the position. Another requirement that I mentioned to become a CLG is that a city has to adopt a historic preservation ordinance, which is the local statute enacted by a community that outlines the legal organization and structure of their preservation program. So that would need to provide a mechanism to designate historic resources as local landmarks or districts and protect them from demolition and sensitive alterations and things like that. And an ordinance, they can vary a lot by community. Local preservation ordinances can, and we definitely encourage that cities tailor their ordinance to match what's going on in your community. But there's some basic standards that an ordinance has to meet for a community to become a certified local government. So the ordinance has to include a statement of purpose, definition of terms. It has to create a historic landmark commission that has at least 5 members. It has to lay out the powers and duties of that commission. And it has to appoint or create a mechanism for appointing a city historic preservation officer. It also has to establish criteria for designating historic buildings and districts as local landmarks or local historic districts. And we recommend there's some guidance for how you would go about doing that. We recommend that cities base those criteria off of those used for the National Register of Historic Places, but then you can tailor them if there's any specific local types of resources that you're looking to designate, you can tailor those criteria. The ordinance also needs to create a process for designating historic buildings and districts. Typically, that means that the Landmarks Commission initiates the designation because this is a zoning change. Local historic landmarks and districts are usually accomplished through a zoning overlay. So typically it would go before the Landmarks Commission for a recommendation, and then the Planning Commission, and then City Council would be the ones to actually take the action to finalize the designation. The ordinance would also need to establish review procedures and standards for alterations to landmarks, including demolition, and that is what we typically call the certificate of appropriateness process. That's the certificate that has to be applied for when a property owner wants to make changes to a landmark building. The ordinance also needs to address demolition by neglect, which is basically a case where somebody lets a building deteriorate to the point that there's no feasible alternative to demolition. We try to proactively get around that by including provisions in an ordinance that lays out that properties can't just be allowed to fall apart to get around the requirements of the ordinance. And we also require that the commission be able to enforce at least a 60-day stay on the demolition of designated historic properties. So if somebody's trying to tear down a designated historic property, we require that there be enough of a stay in there to give the local landmarks commission an opportunity to try and work with the property owner to save the property. We also require that the ordinance include an appeals process. Above and beyond that, ordinances can look very different. You know, we don't require that an ordinance be a super strong ordinance. We don't have any specific requirements about, some ordinances say that a local landmark can be initiated only by the property owner. Some ordinances say that city council can initiate designation. We don't have any requirements around that. So some things a community consider including tax incentives and abatements for local preservation can be established through the ordinance. Some ordinances include minimum maintenance standards, basically saying like local landmarks have to have a roof that is free of leaks and in good shape. The structural components need to be well maintained. Some ordinances include interim protection. So if a property is starting the designation process, it's protected as soon as that process starts. As I mentioned, some require owner consent and others don't, and some include provisions to protect vacant buildings from damage. So those are just other ways ordinances can be tailored to meet what's going on in your community. The ordinance does lay out, most importantly, the permitting procedures for locally designated properties. And this process is really important. If a property owner has to apply for a certificate of appropriateness to make changes, usually beyond routine maintenance, if it's something that doesn't require a permit, usually that's not going to require a certificate of appropriateness. But it really helps promote the rehabilitation of historic properties. It discourages demolition. If you have a local historic district and somebody's doing a new building within that district, it encourages compatible infill construction because the Landmarks Commission typically has review over over all the parcels within that local historic district. And it really ensures that exterior alterations are going to be compatible with the historic character of the building and or the district around it. And it helps preserve and enhance neighborhood character and protects property investments. And one thing I appreciate about working with local governments is there's this misconception very common around the state that the higher the level of government, the stronger the protection on historic properties. And it's actually the opposites that is true. As you can see from this graph, so at the federal level, properties can be designated at the federal, the state, or the local level. At the federal level, through the National Park Service, we have the National Register of Historic Places program. And, every community has properties that are listed in the National Register. It's a wonderful program. It can help property owners qualify for grants or be eligible for state or federal tax incentives for work to their buildings. But ultimately, the National Register of Historic Places does not protect properties from alterations. It does not place any restrictions on private property owners. So if you have a building that's listed in the National Register that's owned by a private property owner and they want to tear it down, there's nothing that's going to stop them from doing that unless there's state or federal funding involved, and then they would have to go through a special process. But it's a wonderful program that really encourages pride in historic buildings, but it's not going to protect buildings. And at the state level, one of our programs is the Recorded Texas Historic Landmarks Program, which you often see the large metal markers displayed outside of buildings. And that program does protect properties, but property owners have to notify us of changes that are beyond routine maintenance to the exterior of buildings. But the most we can do, we try to work with them if they're going to tear something down or if the changes are inappropriate. But if they wait us out, we can impose a waiting period, but that's the most we can do. And if they wait us out, they can proceed. So local landmarks are really the greatest protections we have for historic buildings. It's the only one that's done through a zoning change and requires a permitting process issued by the local government for work to historic properties. And so local landmarks and districts are designated on the basis of local criteria and the local procedures that are laid out in your community's ordinance. And as I said, it's the only protection that's achieved through a zoning change. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about, Alexis had mentioned that Hidalgo is interested in the historic tax credit program, and that's not my program, but I did want to touch on it and how it can work with the CLG program. So tax credits help finance historic preservation projects by offsetting income tax or business tax liability as a dollar for dollar reduction. And there are state and federal tax incentives that are available. The federal rehabilitation tax credit, that is a 20% tax credit for qualified expenses on eligible rehabilitation projects. That one is only open to income producing properties. So it would be like downtown commercial buildings or any historic commercial buildings, rental, residential, things like that. But it's not something that's residential properties that are in a residential use could use. Applicants have to be tax-paying entities, and there's a pretty large threshold for using the federal tax credit. It typically requires a whole building rehabilitation. It's not something that fits well with smaller rehabilitation projects. And so that is the National Park Service program, but it's administered in the state of Texas by the Texas Historical Commission. We also have the Texas Historic Preservation Tax Credit, and this is a program that's been around since around 2015, and it's can be used like the federal tax credit program. It can be used for whole building projects, but the threshold to qualify for this program is lower, so it also fits smaller types of projects, and it's really brought tax credit projects to a lot more communities around the state that previously weren't able to use them. This one is open to income producing properties and nonprofit organizations, and it allows for a credit on the Texas franchise tax or insurance premium tax of 25%. This is probably hard to read, but hopefully we'll have printouts of these as well. As I mentioned, like listing in the National Register qualifies buildings to be eligible for the state or the federal tax credits. A building has to be listed in the National Register or eligible for listing and eventually listed to be able to use the federal tax credit program. For the state tax credit program, a building can be a state designated property, so it can be a recorded Texas historic landmark or a state antiquities landmark, or it can also be listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And those tax credits can be combined. They can be used separately or in conjunction with one another, and combining the credits can really make projects possible that were never previously financially feasible. As I mentioned earlier, so this is not my program, but Alexis had mentioned that the city was interested in taking advantage of tax credit programs. Again, you don't have to be a CLG for your community to utilize tax credits. But ways that local governments can get involved is through helping promote tax credits to local property owners, being aware of them, making property owners aware of them. A lot of cities that have local preservation ordinances are also reviewing these projects at the local level because those buildings tend to also be local landmarks. But what we're seeing a lot right now is that CLGs can really lay the groundwork for state and federal designations that qualify properties to participate. For example, the city of Bryan has applied for a CLG grant to list their downtown commercial district in the National Register of Historic Places. And the reason for doing that was, they've been interested in the National Register program for a long time, but they had a developer who was interested in working on a local building that didn't currently have any designations and said, hey, it would be great if the city could work with us on getting this district listed in the National Register. So they're working on that nomination right now using one of our grants to help qualify all the property owners in their downtown district to apply for state and federal tax incentives. And I think that is all that I have. Let me stop sharing. But I would be happy to answer any questions that I could. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think I can. I might have to get clarification.
Could this apply to houses? Because we have two architects from the 40s and 50s, York and I think Hamaguchi, and they built houses. They're really cool. And they're well-known architects.
Mm-hmm.
So can an individual homeowner qualify for this?
For the state and federal tax credits, they definitely could not for the federal tax credits. I don't think residential would qualify for state, but I can put our tax credit team in touch to talk more about that. I don't want to speak too much about that program because it's not my area of expertise. There can also, an ordinance, a local preservation ordinance can establish tax abatements and tax incentives for local property owners, typically around the cost of any offsetting the costs to keep a historic property maintained would allow for a tax abatement. So that is something I'd be happy to send some examples of communities that have local preservation tax abatements and incentives.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really want to thank you guys at the Texas Historic Commission. You guys have made this process very simple and easy to follow. And like you guys have, for example, the preservation ordinance templates and examples that cities can look at and then tailor, like you said, to a local municipality. I don't know if the commissioners are made aware, but Anna just won a grant today. We just got the results for a historic resource survey, right? And so we got just through the THC. So I really want to congratulate Anna on that, Anna and Frank, for everything that she's done on that. And I really want to thank you for coming down and chatting with us and kind of walking us through the whole process. I know just from your presentation, it seems like you're drinking through the fire hose, but you guys have just made it very simple. And your FAQ on your website kind of just lays out all the steps to do it. But I did have one question on the HPO regarding the Secretary of Interior professional qualification standard. I know you said that there needed to be a letter if you couldn't find someone that met that qualification. But how does one go about getting qualified for that professional standard?
It depends. There's a number of different categories under which somebody can meet the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards. I have a master's degree in historic preservation. So I qualify as an architectural historian. If somebody has an graduate or graduate degree in history and experience working in the field, they can meet the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards. Architects can. So it kind of depends on your educational background. There are also certificate programs in historic preservation and in some of these other programs that can qualify someone to meet the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards. And we also, so we have a historic preservation officer appointment form that when a city is joining the CLG program or just staffing changes at the city level, that we ask that this form be filled out and submitted to us to let us know who the historic preservation officer is. And that's, we ask if the HPO doesn't meet our qualifications, we ask a letter be attached to that. But yeah, it really kind of depends if architects, historians, things like that are the types of expertise that would meet those qualifications.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure, and I will mention too, you know, we do have that ordinance template on the website, but I'd be happy to, it's always helpful to look at what other communities have done that have adopted a preservation ordinance, and I would be happy to send some examples to Alexis. The city of Mercedes was just certified as a CLG earlier this year, and they have an ordinance that was just adopted that would be a really good one to look at that's up to date with a lot of the current state law.
Perfect. Thank you.
I have a question here. What is the maximum amount of funds, let's say the city of Harlingen can get on a particular project? Is it 50,000 plus the tax credits?
Oh, so the 50,000 was for the CLG grant program, and we do not have limits. We don't have a specific limit that we can't go above. That's just the range. Normally our grants range from $5,000 to $50,000. It is a 1-to-1 match. I will mention that. So for every dollar that we award, there has to be a cash match provided by the community or an in-kind match. We have some communities that are using staff time as their match for the project, but the general range that we fund is usually $5,000 to $50,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On your, when you establish a boundary for a community, can you have separate boundaries or do they have to be contiguous as far as historic preservation areas?
Yeah, so for a community that becomes a certified local government, it's actually the local government, the city itself, that would become the CLG. When you're creating local historic districts, usually those boundaries would follow the historic development of that area. So if there was a neighborhood that was platted all at the same time, or a downtown commercial district that developed around the same time, you would draw the boundaries based off of that historic development of that area.
Is there any other questions for Ms. Kelly? Thank you so much. We appreciate the presentation, very informative. We look forward to working with you. And I know that Alexis will be reaching out with any additional information requested by the commission. If there's no other questions from the commission at this time. All right, thank you. Moving on.
Item 5, consideration and possible action to approve the ordinance on second and final reading, amending the Harlingen City Code of Ordinances, Article 2, Valley International Airport Division 1, generally, Section 8-25 Airport Operations Manual, and adopting Article 11, Valley International Airport Division 1, Section 8-25 Airport Certification Manual.
An ordinance of the city of Harlingen, Texas, amending Harlingen Code of Ordinances, Article 2, Valley International Airport Division 1 generally, Section 8-25 Airport Operations Manual, and adopting Article 2, Valley International Airport Division 1, Section 825 Airport Certification Manual.
The motion?
Motion approved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Item 6, consideration and possible action to cancel the Harlingen City Commission meeting of December 18, 2024. City manager.
Mayor, we put this item on the agenda, in case the commission wanted to cancel the upcoming meeting scheduled for December the 18th. I will note that we will have to have a special meeting after the election on the 14th, just to canvass the votes. We don't have a date yet. That's still to be determined by the county elections administrator. And so once we have that date, we'll call the commission to see when they're all available to meet.
Well, this is up to the commission. I did ask to put it on the agenda. We had talked about it before. I don't remember if it was last year or another holiday that we missed. And so if there's nothing that's pressing from planning that we need, do you have anything, any notices?
No.
You do the man. We need to make sure we take care of it.
We just have a smoke shop that wants to remove. So they'll be delayed. The first reading will be the January 15th, and then second reading will be the first meeting of February. So we just have this one business that will be.
It'll be the first one will be in first week of January, right? And then
No, that's January 1st. It's federal holiday.
okay.
So it'll be the next meeting on the 15th.
So we only have one meeting in January?
Yes.
I'm available December 18th.
As am I.
So am I.
It should be a quick meeting.
Okay. All right, then there'll be no action. Moving on.
Consideration and possible action to approve a resolution to cast 245 votes for one candidate or distribute the votes among any number of candidates to submit to the chief appraiser to serve in the Cameron County Appraisal Board of Directors. City manager.
Mayor, I received a call from Cameron County asking us to allocate rather 245 votes, which is the number that's been allocated to the city of Farmington, to candidates on the Cameron County Appraisal District. Apparently, the process has changed and it's no longer one member, one vote. And the city of Farmington has allocated 245 votes. We recently reappointed Albright to the Cameron County Appraisal District Board, so we can either give him all our votes, or we can distribute them amongst him and another member. That is up to the city commission to decide.
Question.
Yes.
You said Cameron County called you, or is it Cameron County Appraisal District called you?
No, Cameron County Commissioner brought the call, and then he had I think the secretary from the appraisal district board calls. The document.
I'm not abstaining from this thing.
Yeah, this was, I know that this was taken up on a meeting that I wasn't present, and I think Commissioner Pettis led that meeting. And that was my concern, because I get to give that there was a change in the way that this was going to be conducted. And so the way that I read this is that there's only going to be 5, right, that are selected. And so potentially our appointee may not serve, which is concerning. But obviously, if this commission has reappointed Mr. David, then all of the votes should go towards him, so we can have a seat at the table.
Yeah, I would say, David Argabright is rather rational, he's intelligent, he's been there, he understands the mechanisms of the people. And he does what he believes is right for the people. And I believe he should get all the votes.
We also have Alan Ozuna on here.
See, if this is the old Concord divide.
Right, no, I'm agreeing. I'm just saying.
Yeah, and Alan's a mighty fine person, that's the process. area. But yeah, we don't want to divide and conquer.
Without further ado, I'll go ahead and make that motion to, select and give, 245 votes to David, Albright.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and for the record, Commissioner Vogel says abstaining from the vote. Well, ladies and gentlemen,